Hi, everyone. It's Miss Mizell. I wanted to introduce you to one of my favorite books, and I actually have met this author. I met her in Atlanta several years ago, and she is not only an amazing author, but she is actually a great storyteller. So I'm going to read Agatha's Feather Bed by Carmen Agra Deedy. Right there, Carmen Agra Deedy. Do you see that little shop sandwiched between two skyscrapers? The shop belongs to my friend Agatha. She spins yarn and weaves cloth, which she sells. The patterns she weaves are so amazing and the colors are so beautiful that people come from all over Manhattan to buy her wares. Agatha loves to talk and she tells wonderful stories. In fact, you could say Agatha could spin a yarn better than anyone I know. Here's one she told me the other day, and I know it must be true because even Agatha couldn't have made this one up. One afternoon, a little boy was shopping with his mother in Agatha's fabric shop. He was very bored and began playing with a shiny scrap of red cloth. Agatha leaned down and said to him, "That's silk. Do you know where it comes from?" He just shook his head. I love the sound books make when you turn the page. Whoops. "It comes from worms," said Agatha. "Worms!" he exclaimed. "Why, yes, silkworms," said Agatha. "Wow, what kind of worm does this come from?" he asked, holding up a ball of purple cotton yarn. "That's a very good question," Agatha replied. "That's cotton, and it doesn't come from a worm at all. It comes from a cotton ball that grows right out of the ground." "What about the rest of the stuff?" asks the boy. "Does it come from neat places too?" "Oh, yes. This is wool, and it comes from sheep. That's easy." "You're right," she said. This cloth is linen. Feel how stiff it is. I'll bet you can't guess where it comes from." The boy thought and he thought. Finally, he said, "Well, where does it come from?" "It's a plant called flax," answered Agatha. "Let me tell you something I tell my customers, especially children. Everything comes from something. Nothing comes from nothing. Just like paper comes from trees and glass comes from sand, an answer from a question, all you have to do is ask." It made the little boy smile. It's a beautiful picture, I think. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Agatha went upstairs to her apartment. Several months later, she had ordered a new feather bed from her favorite catalog, BB Lean. It had just arrived that very day. Her old mattress was so lumpy and bumpy, it was like sleeping on coal lumps and cherry pits. Quickly, she changed into her nightgown and brushed and flossed her teeth. I'm glad she has good habits. She took out the tortoiseshell pins, and her long white hair fell, and it fell, and it fell, until it lay in swirls around her feet. Look how beautiful. I love her slippers. She has bunny slippers. She has several cats. They're also ready to go to bed. Here's more cats. She has geese that are looking in her window. Look, more cats. I love the cat that is sleeping on the pillow. More geese behind the bed. And there she is brushing her hair. Then she brushed it with her boar bristle brush. She never even finished her 100 strokes. She was so eager to try out that new mattress. She settled into bed, and in minutes, she was asleep. She looks very cozy. Agatha dreamed that her room was filled with strange sounds, hushed whispers, and a pitter-patter of little feet. Suddenly she woke with a start as she heard her window close with a thud. She turned slowly in bed and saw something across the window. Let me start that over. She turned slowly in bed and saw that standing across her windowsill were. See, all the cats also woke up. Can you see that? All the cats are woke. They are awake and they're looking out the window. It's a lot of cats. Oh, this is interesting. There's what's in her window. 6 naked geese. They were shivering in the cold and covered with goosebumps. She caught them just as they had ducked out. Agatha stared and stared. You could have knocked her out with a feather. At last she opened the window and said, "May I help you?" The smallest goose, Sydney, stepped into the room. He pointed his little pink wing at Agatha's bed and said, this is going to be very interesting. There's the picture. "We want our feathers back." "What?" asked Agatha. "Feathers, Agatha, feathers. We've been listening. Everything comes from something, nothing comes from nothing, just like paper comes from trees and glass comes from the sand, and the feathers in the feather bed don't grow on trees, my dear," he said. Where do you think the feathers in her feather bed came from? It's very interesting. Here we go. "Where did you think the feathers in that feather bed came from?" asked the little goose. Agatha looked at the bed, and she looked at the geese, and she looked at the bed, and she looked at the geese. Something in her sensed that the goose was cooked. "I have to tell you we mean business, Agatha," said Sydney. "I wouldn't mess with a gaggle of angry, naked geese. We're not a bunch of quacks. This could get ugly," he said. But Agatha had already made up her mind. She had worked hard to earn the money to buy the feather bed, and yet she thought, what about those little guys out there in the cold? "I'll tell you what," said Agatha, a little down in the mouth. "Get back to me in 3 days. Trust me," she said. And she gave them her credit card so they could book up at the downtown motel. This was a sign of goodwill, and they left quietly. Naturally, she'd sent them on a wild goose chase. Then she didn't waste a minute. She went downstairs to her sewing room, snatched her scissors, and got to work. For 3 days, she didn't open her shop, and she didn't speak to anyone. What is Agatha going to do? It's very interesting. Here's the picture. And on the 3rd night, just as they'd agreed, the geese came tapping at her window. This time Agatha was expecting them. She had left the window open, and she smiled to herself as they popped in, one by one. "We're back, Agatha," said Sydney. "We had a great time with that credit card." Uh-oh, great time with another person's credit card. They kept wanting to give us a bill, and we just said, "No, thanks. The last thing we need is another bill." Do you get it? The last thing they need is another bill. We'll see if you get it. But he never finished his sentence. He looked across the room and he saw hanging on her wall were, what's going to be hanging on her wall? It's pretty cool. There you go. Look what was hanging on her wall. 6 white fleecy coats. Agatha had spun and woven and sewn each one. The geese were extremely grateful and thanked her kindly. Each goose slipped into his new coat and took a gander in the mirror. As they were about to leave, Sydney turned to Agatha and said, "You know, Agatha, these are really magnificent coats. Where did you get them from?" Agatha sat up in her bed, and the geese saw their coats were made from. What do you think they were made from? It's going to be very interesting. They were made from. Can you see it? What do you see? Yeah. They were made from Agatha's hair. And Agatha smiled and said, "Everything comes from something. I have your feathers and you have my hair. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Huh, Sydney?" Again, Agatha, said one of the geese. "You keep us in stitches. By the way, Agatha," added Sydney, chuckling, "your hair looks ducky. And lucky for you and me, hair grows back just like feathers." Do you see her hair? Look at how short her hair. I love it. It's a bob. Whoops! It's a bob cut. I love it. Agatha says she's never heard another honk from her fine feathered friends. However, someone's been leaving fresh goose eggs at her doorstep every morning. Where do goose eggs come from anyway? I wanted to just read you a little bit about the author. Carmen Agra Deedy is a professional storyteller and the author of The Last Dance, The Treeman, and the Library Dragon, and The Secret of Old Zeb. She's also the author of The Yellow Star. Her books have received numerous awards. And she also has a collection of stories that can be heard on NPR, including an audio tape called Growing Up Cuban in Decatur, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta. She has performed at the Folger Shakespeare Library, the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and on Broadway at the New Victory Theater and many places. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia with her family. And I have to tell you again, I have seen her do her storytelling in person. I believe she is an amazing author, but her storytelling, I could sit for hours and listen to her. I hope you enjoyed Agatha's Feather Bed by Carmen Agra Deedy. Miss Mizell says bye.